let's talk about Anne. Yes, because we are here to hear his inspiring speech, and also to discuss afterwards about the work, the job of design, and his future. And why have we chosen Arne as our speaker today? I personally met Arne a few years ago because I was at a boot camp at the Design Thinkers Academy. And we thought this was a really interesting career he has. He will talk about it later on, from a creative director of a design agency to uh, founding this international network that is Design Thinkers, present in the 24 countries, I think. So it's quite impressive. And we think he might be a person really interesting to talk about the future of the job of designer with us. So why do we think that? Because also he has put creativity in the heart of his work with some concepts as the Wednesday Web Jam, but also the Creative Leadership podcast. He's interviewing a lot of different creatives right now for his new book to be edited soon. So I think these are all the ingredients that make him the perfect speaker for today to well, take us to this future of design. So Arne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's interesting that people have in a moment of fear and stress, they have two responses, right? It's either, well, it's actually three. It's flee, fight, or freeze. And I'm thinking maybe I should just run away, because that's a lot of pressure you just put on me. I specifically when you mentioned the book that I was going to be edited soon, I was like, oh, I'm still really doubting where that book is going. But thank you very much. I think actually being scared and being nervous and being anxious and all that is part of the job. It is so if I go a little quick into my presentation, I would say it's probably essential for a creative to doubt him or herself continuously, although it's very sad, but I think it's part of the job, because it's such a personal, something, it's such a thing that you do from the heart. If you're a good designer, you're always insecure about what your work, but that's maybe just me. So I'm going to quickly, so I'm actually going to time myself, because I don't want to talk too much, because I really want to listen to you as well. And please, anything that comes to mind, any question, any comment, anything, just put it in the chat, because later, after my talk, that might be interesting enough to kind of go into. So really quickly about myself, as was already said, it's about 15 years ago, I started Design Thinkers, which later also kind of split up in Design Thinkers Group and Design Thinkers Academy. I did so being a creative director at a design agency, because I didn't really felt that I wanted to do that the rest of my life. I wanted to make the world a better place, and I was really searching for something more meaningful than doing campaigns or putting sort of the to be a little critical, the lipstick on the pig, if you will, know what I mean. And I really wanted to, do something essential. And so my thing was that I didn't fit into any bubble. I actually didn't really feel like I was a designer. I was a creative director, and I was a strategist. And there was always this discussion. I actually looked for a job when I wanted to leave, and I wanted to do something with surf design, because that was kind of slowly emerging from Germany and the UK, and I was doing these projects, but I was interested in strategy, and I was interested in art direction and creative direction and being a design director. But there was, in all the agencies that I applied for a job, they said, what are you? Are you a strategist, or are you a designer? Are you, are you a creative director, or are you strategist? And I was like, why would there be a difference? Those two should merge. So 15 years ago, someone told me, there is this, and it was a professor from Stanford. No, it's actually like 18 years ago or so. I can't really remember. A long time ago, someone told me, if you want to have a career in design in the West, and sort of that was the topic of his talk as well, a career in design, which is interesting because this is kind of full circle, because now I'm talking about the career and the future of the designer. He said, if you look at, like, for instance, graphic design, branding, those kind of jobs that designers can do in the West, in the near future, the big design jobs will go to designers in India and China, because they're great designers, and they're a lot cheaper. So it makes sense that all these jobs won't go to European or American designers. So you have an advantage still when it comes to strategic thinking. So this kind of made me think, and he mentioned this design thinking, and it was this kind of this gray area in between all these spaces, and I never fitted in anywhere, because I also have, like many creative people, dyslexia, and I never fitted into any system. So I was looking for, which bubble do I fit in, and there was no bubble, and I felt like a trespasser always. But like, I'm not I'm not a strategist, and I'm not a consultant. I'm not a researcher. I'm not I'm many of these things, but I'm curious, and I love to learn, and I like things. So I was kind of stuck there. I was like, I always felt a little bit like a trespasser. And I come from a creative family, and I've been creative, in music and theater and photography and design. But I wasn't an expert. I never been like the expert. So I was kind of sort of, and then I discovered design thinking, which kind of sort of gave a word to being sort of part of many bubbles, or like in between the spaces. And that kind of launched my career in design thinking, being a strategist, wanting to use creativity in my way of thinking inside organizations where they still had no solution. So where they could use some more creativity, where there was a lot of linear thinking, and I could give them some creative thinking. So what is what are designers? So you could argue that this is design. There's people who say, no, there's no real intention there in the shape of it, but I don't know. You could argue, but still, people are always designing things, creating things. This is the first statue that was fun. If you haven't read the book Sapiens, you should really read the book Sapiens. This was the first statue found that was sort of created. It's like, I don't know, 30,000 years old or something, and it is amazing. And you might think, well, I've seen statues of a person with a lion's head before, but here's the thing: people can imagine things that are not real. So you should really read this book, Sapiens, because it's the core of the human skills. We can imagine things, we can connect things. A person, a figure with a lion's head, it doesn't make sense. No other living being can do this. We can imagine things that are not real. Like he says, gods, states, money, human rights, it's all in our mind, but we make it real. This is really, really essential, because this is sort of not just a designer's or a creative or an artist's skill. It is something we all do all the time. There are things in our mind, and we make them real because we can imagine them, and we can organize accordingly, which is amazing. We'll come back to that later. The other thing is, admitting ignorance sparked the scientific revolution, meaning that at one point, somewhere in the 1600s, we said, wait a minute, actually, we don't know everything that's important. Although, all our kings and our gods kind of in all the books said, this is all that you need to know that is important, and everything else is not important. Actually, there's stuff out there that is important, and we don't know what it is, and what we do know might not be right. Again, this is like a big moment in history where the scientific revolution was started with, because this is where you thought, we have to check what we know, and we have to discover new things. That is amazing. Again, it has nothing to do with designers, artists, or the likes. It is a human trait. It's something that we do. All right, so I'm going to give you a proposition. This is up for debate, right? Okay, because I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I like to think that design is sort of combining science and art, is this scientific thinking of let's try, let's sketch, let's prototype, let's tinker, let's learn by trial and error. And it is part of art where we shape things and we create emotions and emotion around it, and we kind of look at it from a more an artistic point of view. So maybe it's a marriage between science and art. I don't like definitions, by the way, because I think when at the moment something is defined, it kind of dies. But I like sort of, it gives you a direction of thought. I think this might be an interesting way of thinking about it. Okay, we'll talk about it later. But it is for sure, design and designers are about connecting things that aren't connected or are not connected well enough or connected differently. You never come up with something new. It's always about you get your inspiration here, you get your inspiration there, and you put it together and something new comes up and something new emerges. And this connecting is key for our future as designers and the future of design and the future for generalists and people who are what I would call creative leaders. And as designers, we are very skilled in this way of manipulating the tangible and intangible into new meaning. So we shape things. It's not just about tangibles, intangible. We shape things. We shape the world. Just think about a world without design. And I'll come back to that later as well. And so this connection, if you think you're as being someone at the intersection, at the crossroad of many things like, why, sorry, I have to point this way. I'm like a weatherman now, like the weather's going like this. Why, you have to think about why do people need, what do they desire? What are their needs, right? You have to think about what's possible, the technology. We're always dealing with technology and design, whether you're a graphic designer, or there's always design, technology, feasibility, and et cetera, et cetera. You have to take that into account always. Then this context of culture, trends and politics, everything that's happening, you have to kind of take that into account. And it has to be organized somehow on small scale and big scale. You can scale these things, but it's always, and there's probably more things, but basically as designers, we are kind of connecting this, right? So we're kind of putting all these together continuously all the time. And so the ones that connect all these things the best, and sort of, I think that's where we're going, because they are the amazing problem solvers and they're the generalists. So you can be an expert in organization, like you're just there. You can be just here, and you can be just here. You can be just there, but you can also be at the crossroad. And I think that's where designers are good at, because they are, they have sort of their antennas out, and they browse and they get inspired. They're really good at these things, in my mind. Again, it's up to debate, so we're going to talk about this later. So just a thought exercise. What happens when you take everything that is designed away? Just a thought exercise. Everything that, just look around you, look around and see, what did people, it could be bad design, good design, right? So everything that's designed, take it away. I think we're either in a desert or a forest, or, and naked, because it's all, designed and created by people. So there's no, I'm saying that, so there's this thing like everyone's a designer and all designers think that is a very stupid thing to say. I think design the word has been kind of, it has had many different meanings throughout history. It had some very bad connotations at the early, like hundreds of years ago. It was actually all about, schemes and not very positive things. But design is a word that can mean many things. But in general, it is about creating things that are useful, meaningful, that are you can actually make, that are feasible, et cetera, et cetera. All right, again, up to debate. Now we talk about the future of design and designers. It's totally unpredictable. Anybody who tells you, I know what the future is going to be like, is lying, but we can imagine a future. And I think we need Imagineers, people who can imagine a future, and then we need people to be able to build it. So technologists and scientists and those people are really good at discovering things that are here at the moment, but they're not really good at imagining possibilities and possible futures. So I think it's more, not so much about predicting it, it's more about, you know, imagining a future, a scenario, and then trying to create that. Very quickly, if I look at sort of a history of design, this beautiful Eames lounge chair could be designed, is designed by, you know, one person, could possibly, maybe, obviously there's a team of people around, but you can imagine this. You can imagine you as a designer sitting in this chair with your newspaper and saying, yeah, that's comfortable. I think this is okay. I think this is good enough for people. You can do it, right? But if you do this one, this chair, you probably want to talk to a person that is in a wheelchair all day and work with them. You probably want to work with people who know technology, and maybe a physician, a doctor, people who understand the human body and what it does to a person to sit in a wheelchair all day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do this alone. So again, this is where designers go into sort of becoming facilitators, creative leaders, or facilitative leaders of the work that they do together in a network ecosystem of experts. All right, I might go too fast, but so just a few things that are changing that you are going to deal with, and we're dealing with right now, but in the future. So robotics, you know, this is going to change the world beyond recognition, I think, but how, we don't know. Nobody knows. Artificial intelligence, you know, this is already everywhere. You don't even aware of, you know, half of the time that artificial intelligence is like in all our machines, in our phones, it's everywhere, right? But what is it going to do in the future? What could it do in the future? What is the potential of it? We don't know. Nobody knows. We just kind of, it's like an arms race, right? So because one company does it, the other company does it, we all have to do it because it's an arms race. But we don't know what the long-term effects and results and consequences are of artificial intelligence. Virtual reality, you know, amazing possibilities. We haven't scratched the surface. You know, we can imagine, what could that be? What could that do? How can we help humanity in our world and our planet and our societies using this? You know, we just scratched the surface of this technology. And this is the big one, quantum computing. We can't even imagine what it is. It's already working, but we can't, our brain cannot imagine that you can be at two places at the same time. Basically, that's what quantum computing does. It has, you know, it's not two separate things at the same time working. No, it's two same, I can't even say it. It's like, that's like impossible, but it's there and it's going to change everything. Really, it's amazing, but it's the potential of this, but we have no clue what this means in 20 years, 50 years, or even 5 years. We don't know. So my point is that we cannot compete with technology. It's impossible, and we should not compete with technology. We shouldn't, and we can't. And so, you know, there's a little thing, and I just mentioned this at a conference with data analysts and engineers, and I said, if you can be replaced by an algorithm, you will be replaced by an algorithm. I'm not, again, I'm not a futurist. To me, I don't see any other argument. You know, this is what's going to happen. So what are the uniquely human skills? Creativity is a uniquely human skill because it's part of it is trying things that are sometimes irrational, or combining things that make no sense, or making mistakes and then saying, hey, that's actually pretty cool. I mean, up to now, computers will not do it. They can't make, like, you know, they can't just go try something that is stupid and then come up with a great idea. Human beings can do it. We call that serendipity or happy accidents. We can have those. Computers that won't have those. So creativity is a wonderful skill to have, okay? Up to now. I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but that might not be replaced by an algorithm. So creativity. Chaos is the core. So if we look at chaos, we're now in a bit of a state of chaos with the pandemic, but we're also moving in a future that is so complex. Systems are so complex that we are at a state of chaos, and too much chaos is no good, but chaos for creativity is wonderful. This is our most creative moment, when we're at the edge of chaos, when there's not that much structure and there's a lot to play around with. So edge of chaos is where we are now. And I think this is where we need people, designers, imagineers, creatives. And in the words of Ken Robinson, if you know him as my big hero, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. So again, it's like you have to be prepared to be wrong. Computers won't be wrong, right? They do whatever you program them to do, and then they program each other, whatever that, so, but they won't be wrong. People can be wrong, and I think that's a wonderful thing to kind of consider. Now, the only thing we need is psychological safe space. So the one thing that stifles and scares designers and creatives is that often we don't have a safe space. So either our employer or our client puts us in this stressful situation where we kind of say, okay, we're just going to do the thing we know and stay in the safe space in the middle. But so leaders, creative leaders, maybe people like yourself, if you can create a safe space for creativity to flourish and to nurture it, we can all be we're not all going to be design experts in a specific field of design, but we can all be creatives. We can all be imagineers. Okay. Again, empathy. The other uniquely human skill is empathy. It is obviously empathy is very complicated. It starts within yourself, understanding yourself. Who am I? Connecting with yourself, and so you can connect with others. But it is this, a robot does not have empathy. If you have a robot in front of you and the robot tells you that his or her, its mother died yesterday, you're like, yeah, sure, because you're like, you're a robot. That makes no sense. But human beings are different. Again, just putting it out there. And learning by doing. I came back to this. This is the tinkering. This is the trying. This is the I take something. I try it. It fails. Is riding a bicycle. People learn by doing. If you're not prepared to make a mistake, you won't find anything original. If you're not prepared to fall down, you'll never learn how to ride a bicycle. That's just the way we learn things. But we don't have these environments often in corporate organizations. But designers, they do. They create these organizations. If you work in a creative agency, you probably have a creative environment like in my company where we can tinker and try things out because there is no other way. You can't ask a designer to design something and just have one go and it has to be perfect. No, you're going to try and sketch. So you get, you as a designer, we understand this, I think. So we are in this, in this connection. So my vision on the future, and it's just my opinion, right, is that we need people who understand simplifying things, generalists, connectors, navigators. We need people who are designers, maybe in a skill, but with a mindset that is able to connect things. That is the people who can say, hey, I take this and I take that and I take that. So my career, I started designing organization. I started thinking, how can I design people getting together? How can I design an organization or a company or a group of people? And then I used all the skills of both graphic design and branding, but also organization. So I think that is, if there's any future of designers that I'm personally really interested in, and again, there will always be a need for people who are really good experts in, for instance, graphic design, as an example, or product design. Of course there are. I mean, it's not a competition there, but there is this other thing that's emerging, and there is this new layer of people that we need, and designers have a head start. It's not just designers that can do this, but designers have a head start. So I call this creative leadership. Because we need that is what we need, because creative leadership creates a safe space for people to try things and to make these connections and sketch and prototype. And so I call that creative leadership. To me, that's one of the futures of for designers. And that is sort of I think this is my time. Yes. Because so I kind of threw all this stuff at you. And it might be quite a lot to take in, But I want you to kind of think about what do you think? What is your take on the future? And are there any of these elements that I mentioned that you feel that you are either comfortable with or not comfortable with, or totally see totally different direction? Because I think that if I've learned anything, and I'm pretty sure most of you have learned these lessons as well, there's no such thing as a person that knows everything. It's actually the conversation that becomes, so you can enrich each other, and it's the conversation that matters. It's not so much that someone tells you this is the way it's going to be, and that's it. So I'm going to give you a minute of silence. Well, a little bit more than a minute. I say 5-ish minutes of silence, and take a piece of paper and just write down whatever you feel, and whatever comes to mind when you think about your vision of the future. And so we're just going to I'm just going to clock you 5 minutes, and you can, if you want, put anything in the chat, that if you want to kind of mention anything that you were either agreeing with or disagreeing with, or an additional question, put it in the chat. But 5 minutes of just some reflection, and then we're going to put you in a breakout group, and you're going to share some of your thinking with the others, so we can kind of create a vision together. Okay? Is that good? Okay, 5 minutes. All right, go ahead. I'm timing you now. Okay, so we'll slowly get out of that reflective mode, and we're going to put you in breakout groups. And if you, make sure you have a spokesperson in your breakout group. So we'll put you in a breakout group, but also make sure, because we're going to ask the group to present. I mean, everybody can obviously, open up their mic and talk about what they feel and think. But it's good to first assign a spokesperson. Okay. So we're going to put you into breakout groups. Best is, I think, to put, switch on your camera as well. So, because we're people and we like to see people and talk to people. So that'd be nice. So, hey, there's faces. That's also good for me. Right? So, there's actually people behind the names. That's good to know. Because it's such a weird, isn't this a weird year? Sorry, is like, I'm almost getting used to this, which is also a bit sad, to be honest, to be staring at a screen in an empty room in front of a green screen. So, which is like, if you would have told me this like a year ago, I would have said, no way, that's not what I'm doing. But yeah, here I am. Anyway, so we're going to put you into breakout groups, just 20 minutes. What you've just thought and reflected on, please share that. And thank you also for adding something in the chat. We'll kind of talk about that also later, because I think those are some good points. Okay, go ahead. Yes, and we are back. Is everyone back? So now we would like to kind of hear from the different groups, what they have, what they've talked about. And I thought, so I was in one of the groups, and I think we had a really interesting conversation, but there were a lot of topics. So I can imagine that it might be difficult for you to kind of condense it into something, but I'd love to kind of hear from one of the groups, one of the spokespeople, what you talked about. So please unmute yourself, and whoever wants to start starts.
Okay, I'm the spokesperson for the group one. Okay, all the participants, I agree with your vision of the role, the job of a designer in the future. We have to be connect with many people, to be part of a team, and to communicate a lot of all the contributor. We are convinced that there will always have job for the designer if they have empathy and they are able to listen to their environment. Two members of my group are also teacher in the designer school, and they see a huge difference between the idea and the volunteer of the students. They want to develop environment and societal project, but when they arrive on the job market, they face the reality of our society, and they are a bit disappointed. And the last thing, it's for you, Arne. We were a bit disappointed that you not evoke the sustainable environment. All the partners of my group are convinced that we have to do our job with this topic of the sustainable development. Thank you.
Can I comment on that straight away? Because now I'm like, I have to defend myself. That one. No, yeah, no, I didn't mention it specifically, but I did. So what I actually, so in this picture, I put context, society, politics, culture, trends. To me, it's like, that is something, the context that you work in as a designer. And now, obviously, sustainability, where, you know, the planet, what does our culture need? But it depends very much on where you are working as a designer. I think it's different when you work as a designer in Belgium and Europe, or when you work as a designer in India, for instance. Not saying that this, sustainability and all that is not important, but it is this understanding of where the world is moving towards that you then can connect to, and also desires and needs of people. So needing a healthy environment and a future planet to live in. But you have to know then what is possible, feasible, what can we do, and how do we organize that, and how do we communicate these things. So for me, it was kind of covered in that, because I think it's sort of this having your kind of your antennas on. But if you are, say you are you have your own company, and you're a one-man company, one woman company, and you have your graphic designer, for instance. Sustainability is obviously something that you can deal with. You can think about this. Where do I have my material printed? Where do I? But is the company interested in this? Is what is possible in my kind of what I can do within my context? Is it something that so right? So these are kind of, to me, it kind of combine those things. It is more that we are talking about the future of design, where to me it's kind of a given that is going to be so important in the future. But it's but to your point, I think it is bigger than sustainability. It is bigger than that. It is also about society. It is about culture. It is about how do we work, technology, AI, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I know it's a big thing to talk about sustainability at the moment, but I think that if you in my mind, it is bigger than that. But anyway, so far. Who else would like to? So group 2, maybe?
Yes, I was the spokesperson of the group 2 also. My co-participants were a bit shy. But then, well, what they took out of your speech, Arne, was the fact that creativity can't be replaced by an algorithm. So they have this vision of designing a future really strengthened by the collective intelligence. The fact that collaboration is essential, and collaboration between different types of designers, but also with other disciplines. And I also heard them talk about how a designer can have different skills, but that the fact that designers are usually asked about what is your specialty, what is your discipline? Is it graphic? Is it product? Is it I don't know, everything graphic? Yeah, graphic as a service also. Even though they would like to be designer and take design as a method. For some, design thinking was an important topic, something that they use, they use this word. But for some others, it's not, well, design thinking, they don't really rely on with this practice as a word. And also they put in the light the role of a designer as someone who connects, someone who is a catalyst, and someone who do the link, create the link between other discipline, other colleagues and stakeholders in a project. And they see that as a trend for the future too. Did I sum up your ideas, Sandra, Yanis? Alors, Katia, we also had a participant who can write but not speak. So it was an unusual debate.
Yeah. It's good. That's actually still the beauty of technology, that you can also be like Katia in the train and still
Yes.
participate in a webinar, which is an international webinar, which is nice. I like the question of about what is your discipline. I think that's an interesting question, because yeah, it's exactly, well, I started my talk with saying that I didn't know, because I didn't really have one. At least I didn't feel like I had one. I didn't want one. I'm curious. I want to learn many things, and I'm curious about different disciplines. But what is your discipline also in the world of design thinking and service design? Often, to be honest, if I sometimes see job advertisements, like sort of companies looking for designers, and they might call them service designers or UXers or something like that. Often the skills and the experience that they kind of require are like amazing, like they're superhuman beings. Like so I actually believe that it is the point is that, like you were saying, it's about bringing people together, communicating. I think not all designers, obviously, but I think designers are, I think there are more designers out there than there are salespeople out there that can connect people and be creative facilitators, because they're comfortable in these different creative stages. So they can be someone in my team said, can be a coach, for instance. Anyway, so I like that, because what your discipline is, I think that's going to be a question that creates a lot of tension now, but is going to create more tension in the future. So yeah, what's your expertise then? And you're like, I don't know. And you can have an expertise, by the way. My wife is a graphic designer and she loves it, and that's all she wants. And what I do to her is like, you just talk. And so, and she makes things. I'm jealous that she does that. I'm like, I wish I could do what she does. And to her, I'm like, you just talk. Let me just make stuff. Okay, cool. So I mean, we need all these different. We need diversity. That's basically what I said. Okay, sorry, group. I wasn't planning to comment on all the groups, by the way. That's not. Sorry about that. I'm like.
I see that Lode is also commenting on the chat. Not only discipline, but age can also be a good choice.
How so? Like experience, or
experience? If you see these youngsters, they have a totally different opinion.
Yep.
And it can be very interesting to talk to the teenagers nowadays. To know something about the future.
I know. I have a teenage daughter. Yeah. She's like, yeah, Dad. Like Snapchat.
Always
what? Sorry, go
interesting
ahead.
to know their opinion. Just ask and you see something completely different.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, which is part of empathy is being vulnerable, being a lot. So saying like I don't know everything. So I ask people who are younger or come from a different background, or and you can really listen to what they have to say, instead of saying, well, no, I know it's important. So I think that's also part of the skill that you of empathy, at least, of saying, hey, I don't know everything. And to your point, you're totally right. I mean, young people, teenagers, younger generations, they do really see things differently because they basically their brain is wired differently. And yeah, totally true. Good point. Thank you. So group number 3, I think. Yeah. Who was
So I'm the representative of the group 3. So I'm trying to do my best to be a good to make a good summary of that. In our group 2, the discussion revolved mainly around sustainable development. It focused a lot on education and the need to make future designers aware of this issue. However, it seems to us to be well anchored in the new generation. So I think that's probably a big difference between us, the most of us, and the new generation that is very aware of that. Based on that fact, we thought that the designer's role is probably not to be the responsibility for more sustainable production. The designer is not the driving force of that, but his role is mainly to promote a sustainable lifestyle, focused on the quality of objects rather than on quantity. So that was the main points of our discussion, and I would like to add something on the basis of what I've just heard from the first groups, that there is an open-mindedness among designers that can make a lot of things change, I think. What I've just heard about how please listen to the teenagers, open your eyes and let's be aware of being connected, more creating more connection between people is I think something that's could be an asset among designers to make things change or evaluate in a certain way. So I'm not sure I was a good speaker, but maybe the members of my team could see make a thing if everything is okay. So reaction, Arne?
I think they liked it. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So to your point of designers are not the ones responsible for sustainable production and the likes. I want to share this one again. Is this idea of and again, if you haven't read the book Sapiens, it's if you read it from the kind of the point of view of a designer, it's really interesting. It's this idea that so we might not be responsible. I don't think one person is always or one group is responsible because it's a collective and it's a system. The problem is systemic, right? So there's a systemic problem, and to change the systemic problem, you have to take small steps, small interventions. We can create these small interventions to change the systemic problem that we have. So it's a big problem. And it's not just about convincing a few people, but it is about slowly creating little interventions into a system. But this idea of that, so I think what we need is we need people who can imagine potential futures, being more sustainable futures, but also thinking long term. And then we need people who can actually create them and build it. And so, like I said earlier, there's people who are the engineers and the scientists and all that. They're really good at analyzing, and they're really good at creating, building things, but they're not very good at imagining potential scenarios, future scenarios. But if you bring these two minds, and I'm kind of, it's a little bit extreme, but if you bring these two together, you create something wonderful. So, we need people with empathy and creativity to be part of the conversation when it's about technology like AI and quantum computing. We need people who are there with empathy and creativity and all these human skills. And I think designers, because they were schooled that way, it's not because they're different than any other human beings, but they're wired differently because they were trained and they practice a way of thinking that other groups of people haven't done yet. They will, but they haven't done yet. So I think that's potentially, at least I see that around me, at least in my kind of world where I kind of in my little bubble that I am in, that's what I see happening, that there's more designers, creatives who are part of that, future imagination part, which is also a sustainable future, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not about responsibility, but it's about possibility. I think. I don't know if that's but I do like the kind of this focus on sustainability, which is something I kind of like. I didn't expect that, so that's good. I would have had a slide saying, "Oh, sustainability," otherwise. So now I feel like, oh, I missed that point. Thank you very much for pointing that out. All right, so group 4. I was actually in group 4, but Bob, you volunteered. I think you volunteered.
Yeah. They call it the Chinese volunteer. Somebody who is appointed to be a volunteer. Okay, no problem. So we talked about a few things, but first I'd like to react on the use of sustainability, because I had my education 20 years ago, but you also talked about solar passive use of solar energy. We also talked about artificial intelligence then. So a designer will always focus on all those themes, and everything will be important. I think that will be the main role of a designer, that everything is important, and then we have to mix everything together and find a solution for a problem. And if it's sustainability, we can't use sustainability as a kind of fashion word. That would be a mistake. But well, conclusions of our group, we had 5 topics we talked about. First was the connection. You spoke about the connection between the different people of a designer's group, but we also thought that the connection with the client was the most important one. That between the connection between the client and the designer, there could be a kind of chemistry that resulted in a good solution. But as designers, we have to look at we go further than the question. We have to look at the question of the design of the customer, but we have to go a few steps further than that and give a better solution. Second was that it's very difficult to work in big companies and to get the designer's mind in the heads of especially salespeople who have a connection with the customers. That as a designer in a big company, it's difficult to find that connection between the designer and a customer, because there's a group of layers of different people between it. So that's very hard to try to find that connection, but they try it through the salespeople and also to have a contact with the customers directly. Third was that designers need to be a good coach in good design, especially in companies and between people. So the coaching role of a designer is the most important. In that role, we also, and that's a fourth point, we also talked about empathy, that designers or kind of have a kind of different empathy, but they also have a different view. And we talked about the view you have as a tourist. If you walk as a tourist in the city, you see the things differently. So we have to kind of use that role of an external organ that comes into a company or comes into a place which needs a solution. And we have to look at from that empathy from the other angle as a tourist to find a solution. And lastly, we talked also about the future. That's where it will be more about feeling than about hard facts. So feeling will become a lot more important in companies. Companies will go further than what they do now between the facts they talk about, but they will also show a kind of more personality. So those were the 5 main things we talked about.
Yeah, I like the seeing the world as a tourist, because it is. But it's a skill. I mean, sometimes you can take that for granted but it's actually something that is that needs practice. I always, have to remind myself to sometimes just stop and observe. So I do a lot of user research, and I had, for instance, a project once, and I was sitting in a waiting room of a hospital, and I just sat there for 2 days or so. I just was hanging around. It's odd, but it took a while, and basically being a tourist. And then you start noticing things like that nobody else noticed. Even the people who worked there, they didn't notice things because it was always there. And there were notes everywhere. There were written things on the computer and everywhere, like go there, watch this, or pay attention to this. And so I think that's a really important part, but it's also sort of, it's also a research skill, which is interesting because we're, as designers, we're not trained to be researchers. So going back to my being always a trespasser, now I'm doing what we call design research, or quantitative research, and a real researcher will tell me, you're not a researcher. Which school did you do to become a researcher? And they're like, well, I didn't do any research. Well, sorry, like you're not supposed to be here. But it is this. I think there is. So I call this the futures, sort of we're in the world of generalists. We're moving into a world of, and a long time ago, when design thinking started to become more like a buzzword, the T-shaped person was sort of a word. Maybe you will still remember that. T-shaped people. So they have an expertise. So they did go to school for something, and they did have an expertise in something, but they're also very wide. They know a lot of things from a lot of other disciplines too, so they can connect. And I think that's a sort of a way of being, I would say, that is interesting. Anyway, so, and the emotional part. So I think, as an anecdote, I did do a lot of work for big companies, and mostly big companies so we did a project for L'Oréal. And I remember, this is a few years ago, we were doing a project for HR, the HR department. And they were telling a story that they had this big global event, annual event. And probably they didn't have one this year, but back then we still could get together as people. And so they had this big global event, and the CEO had a speech at this event, and he talked about the importance of people within L'Oréal, the company of L'Oréal, that they were happy. That he used the word happy. Now, to me, of course, I mean, you want your people to be happy. They kind of, just like they were blown away that he said happy. They were like, did he just say happy? Like that, like it's not about money, and it's about happiness. Now, it was a really, I mean, it's a very tough French company with a very tough culture, and all of a sudden there was happiness was a word. Now, to me is like, why, what's so weird about that? Isn't that logical? No, it's not logical to work in a large corporate and that your management wants you to be happy, and it becomes a real topic, because 90% of the people in the corporates are not happy, and that's a big problem. So this purpose and, Simon Sinek's why, why do you do what you do, and all these are all kind of signals that emotion and purpose and young people. So to your point, Lode, I hear from young people, and I know specifically like the generation that now is starting like their own companies, like startups. All of a sudden, we're not starting our business. Our own business. We're in startups, but it's also because it's exciting and it's part of their identity. And whereas my parents, they're in their 80s, my father's work was just because he was for retirement, and it wasn't just, he had a nice job. He was kind of lucky, but it wasn't part of his identity the way it is now. Now your work is also part of who you are, and I think there's a shift there too. So I think that's really interesting for designers, whether you're an outsider. And the last thing I want to say is like, so Bob, we will talk about this being an outsider and sort of an outsider as a designer. If you're an outsider, you're not working. If you work for yourself or an agency, you're always being demand, because outsiders, like, are those tourists, right? But if I can make a little bit of a prediction, what I see is that there's a growing gap between agencies and companies. And it has something to do with that we're in this wave where now creativity is being brought back into the organization. So departments of UXers, departments of service designers, et cetera, et cetera. I train people in design thinking and creative problem solving and UX people, and we set up departments of service designers and the likes, which is, and then the agencies. I think there's a misfit between the agile organization that is in a matrix organization. When I was in an agency, I knew who my client was, the marketing manager or communication manager, who usually they were the clients. I wouldn't really be sure, because they're all working in these matrix organizations more and more and more. And I know this, but it's coming, that I think traditional organized agencies, they need to make that bridge somehow. And I think there's a gap there. And I think there's an opportunity, by the way. There's a gap in the market for people who can bridge that. So those outsiders that can bridge the inside of the organization to the outside world, where there's all these expertise and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something there. It's a bit vague, but to me, that's my future where I'm going. So I felt like, hey, wait a minute, there's something happening. It's not design thinking, it's not service design, it's just the first kind of part of it. And it's moving somewhere else. And I think there's the gap between the companies and the agencies. There's something, I don't know if you feel the same, but it's sort of my kind of feeling at the moment. So, and Floor, I also wanted to kind of, because you talked about the coach and education, right? And also in the chat, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because you said something about how designers are kind of educated in a way of thinking. And do you see a future where that way of thinking is being taught at schools, more in different schools as well, besides design schools?
I think so, yeah. I think it's a must. In fact, I think when children are little, they have this skill, because Bob was talking about a tourist. If you walk on the street with a 4-year-old, in fact, he does the same. He stops everywhere, he sees everything around him. But in the schools as they exist nowadays, they just cut out that skill. And I think, I think they should teach that more in school, or bring that back, the way of thinking, so that, in order to make a better society, I think.
So Okay, so is there already, because I think there are, I mean, there's on more university level, high school level, I think there's schools kind of slowly integrating things like from design thinking or service design or these creative methodologies, but so more like middle schools and this is where you don't really see that, right? So this is where I think we're teaching children that there is one question and there's one answer.
Yeah,
you cannot
it's
change it.
linear.
It's very linear, right? So so how? But that's although I think a lot of schools might agree with you, but then there's a systemic problem again that, you know, like in the Netherlands, for instance, government also decides, you know, how what to teach and how they measure schools, how they measure the success of schools. So I don't know, how would we be able to kind of change that and because I hear what you're saying. I think it's about not, I mean, so my design thinkers academy, we often talk about it as the unlearning school, right? So kids are creatives, and there's this whole, you know, this whole research that says, you know, children up to the age of 8, 9, they're all geniuses. They're in lateral thinking. They're amazing, and then the more we educate them, and I shared the Ken Robinson quote. So if you're not familiar with Ken Robinson, you should watch his TED Talk about education, and it's you know, and I have dyslexia, so he was talking straight to me. He's like, yeah, I know that's happening, but because it offers you a system, and you get prepared at school to kind of fit into a system later in your working life that is not there anymore.
No,
or that is changing. So how do we do that?
I once saw a little movie about the Chinese girl in kindergarten, and she was sitting with the teacher on the ground, and she had this turtle, and the turtle had to go from A to B, and she had to find a solution. And when with the whole class, and they found a solution, and then the teacher said, "Okay, wow, now let's mingle it up, and we start all over again." And in that group, there were so many possibilities that children of that age came up with. Yeah. I think that's
amazing.
Yeah, that's a really funny example, I think.
Yeah, there's also there's a test that it's a test to see whether you are material to work at NASA to become an astronaut, right? And children, young children, they are all brilliant at it, and then but adults are like really bad at it. They like, I think it's like 2% or so adults actually make it through the test, and like little kids up to 8, 9, they like 80% of them or something go fly through that test. I don't know exactly what the truth is, because sometimes these are like urban legends, and they grow into a story, and then you share them and you think, is that really true, or is it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that? But we all know there's a truth. So when I do creative sessions, and I have to facilitate people who I consider linear thinkers through a creative process, I literally tell them to have a child's mind. You know, look at it as if you're a child. You know, it's another way of looking at things. It's okay, and it's not saying that children can solve all the complex problems, but you'll see things differently, and you'll notice things differently, and you will. So my son is 8, and he draws a shape, and he says it's an elephant, so it's an elephant. My daughter's 14, she says I can't draw elephants. Yeah, you know, that's a huge difference. And my son is already getting there, because he's getting taught at school when they draw elephants, every kid in the classroom gets the same example, and they all make the same elephant. It's like, oh, so now all of a sudden he's being told like, no, this is an elephant. So why is, so we're like, oh. I'm a really bad parent. in that case. But still, there's something there that we are, and as parents, but also as schools, we are responsible for, having these kids grow up as. I'm not saying that they all have to be designers, like that's the holy grail. That's not what it is, but it's more that you need to be more empathic, and you have to be more agile, if I may use that word, as a human being to adapt to changing circumstances. And I think that is so important, because I'm not saying that the world, we talk about the world changing quicker, faster and faster. Sometimes I do kind of think, if I think about my grandparents, and so my grandmother, although she just a year ago passed away, she was 99, when she passed away. She lived through, Second World War, seeing the first car they were the first in the street to have a car, a plane truck, a phone, television, not color television. Talk about change, radical change that changes. So we're not unique in that, but I think there is there's such a uncertainty at the moment of where everything is going, and I think that having more lateral thinkers, more creative thinkers, people who can imagine a future and are not afraid to try it, is a responsibility for schools, for parents, but also for business companies. So, and this is where I think that, if you are a company and you're whether you are a client of a designer, or you have a creative core in your organization, or you have a purpose, you need to allow people to try new things. Otherwise, in the words of Ken Robinson, you'll never come up with anything original if you're not prepared to be wrong. It's like common sense. Everything in design thinking, by the way, is what we call in Dutch boerenverstand. I call it's common sense. There's nothing, it's not rocket science. It's usually like, that's not really how things go, is it? Like, that's not right? Yeah. But it's just the way it is. I think a lot of it is just common sense. It's just like, but we know that creativity is okay. And we know that there's so many things we just know, we just don't know how to change it. Like sustainability, I think if we can switch it, have like a little switch, and we can kind of turn the switch, say, now everything's sustainable. We would do it, but we just don't know how to get there. So we need simplifiers. So then I will shut up again, but I was just listening to a talk, and I was going to do a keynote, and there was a person in front of me doing a keynote also online, and so you're not in the room. So I just heard the last things he said, and I forgot his name, and I was like, I'm going to look it up. It was just yesterday, but he said something really important. I thought, wow, sometimes people say something and you're like, yeah, I never looked at it that way. He said there's people who are, in his words, simplifiers and difficultators. Let me put it that way. So they're both are okay. So some people just see complex things, and they see, and it is complicated, and they make it more complicated, and they see all these problems, and they see all these things that are difficult. And they're right, because usually it is that way, because things are difficult and they are all interconnected. And then there's simplifiers, and those people can say, well, let's just start here. And they might not be right, but there's a lot of positivity in this, and that's what we're calling design to be a simplifier, to just say, let's just start here. Because there's no way we can, otherwise we'll just be stuck in this complexity, and we don't know where to go, and everything is difficult. Just go and be simplifier. So I thought that's interesting, to be kind of someone who makes things simple and small. And he wasn't talking about design thinking, but to me that's what design thinking is. It's about make it small, just go and try it. It's not about thinking, it's about doing. It's really not about, maybe it's a different mindset, but it's really much about just create an intervention, make it small, try it, learn from it, try it again, learn from it, try it again. And if it works, slowly scale it. But don't make it too big, don't because it's impossible. So I like that. I do those two words kind of like, oh yeah, simplify, difficult. Okay, interesting. I want to be simplified. Any other? Sorry. You have to stop me. I just keep talking because this topic is like my life. This is a bad thing.
I think we didn't hear from the group 4, the room 4.
Yeah.
I don't know who. There is still one group.
This is still one group.
Stijn, were you in this group?
I was in group 4 studio, but I asked one of the designers to be the spokesman, and it was Bob.
Yeah,
Bob. Okay, so we heard about the 4. So sorry,
Yes.
maybe it's me. It's me just being too not the simplifier, the other one.
I let you hear my voice again, so you know you heard me.
I'm reassured.
It was about the tourist, to be the tourist, which is great. Which is actually, Bob, you should make a book out of that.
Actually, it's not my thought. I don't know who told me that, but I forgot about it. But I always remind it, and I always use it when I talk with clients. That I say I'm a tourist, so they have to pay me to be a tourist.
That's a good job. It's still a nice book. Where you get your inspiration from. That's a good book to be. How to be go through life as a tourist, or how to be a tourist as a designer.
Yeah,
that's good. I like that. There's a design methodology, a research methodology. It's called the city safaris, or service safaris, or research safari. And so you're just reminding me of that. The tourist is actually better because talk about empathy. When I was at a conference and there was a researcher talking about safaris as research methodology, basically what you're saying, you're being a tourist. But it was an international conference and there was someone from Nigeria, and he stood up and said, the word safari to us in Africa, that's not a positive thing. That's just you people coming over to our countries and killing all our animals. And so don't use the word safari. So actually, so that we were all like, oh.
Yeah, well, in certain cities, a tourist is not welcome as well. So
there's no escaping. Yeah.
No.
All right. So
some people don't like designers.
Yeah, true. Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, no, it's the which I should have this one as my backdrop. Trespassers will be shot on sight, which is a real fence somewhere in the United States, which is like. So anyone else wants to share a thought or a feeling or a famous last words or about the future of your profession? Don't be shy.
I'm not a designer, but I just want to say.
Then you can't talk. Sorry.
Ah.
We're not interested. It's just about designers here. What are you doing here? No, sorry, Stijn.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the persons that were in my group, because we are organizations that support designers and support companies in working with designers. And actually, you gave me some really interesting insights on how we can, for future projects, on how we can create new, new projects for companies and designers to find each other. It shouldn't always be about specifically product design or designing a new service. I believe there's a lot to do about creating a design thinking culture within the whole organization. So this, for me, has given thought for, or at least food for thought. Is that a correct translation? No idea. But and I'll let my common sense work on it, and maybe this can create a new project. So thank you.
Cool, thank you. Okay. Anything else? Someone like to share a thought you had, or
Can we conclude the webinar?
yeah.
Okay, I will try to do it between two children cries. Okay, I'm sorry about that. First of all, thank you, Arne, to sharing with us a part of your vision of the future, and especially to encourage us to manage the future of our job. I personally really appreciate the debate in small group. It was very inspiring to exchange with such interesting people. And I'm convinced that everybody has understand the importance to stay connected on the long term, and also to pursue, to propose lots of scenarios for the future of our society. Then don't be afraid, don't worry to be wrong, and good luck in your practice. With all the partners of the Tripod 2 project, I wish you a wonderful end of year 2020, and hope that 2021 will be much more better than this year. Okay. See you soon, and have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.